I've come to view soils as a strategic resource, and I don't think that soils tend to be viewed all that broadly in society as a strategic resource, let alone one of the most fundamental and strategic of the resources that we have on this planet. We tend to think of oil as a strategic resource. The problem of global soil degradation, in my view, is one of the most underappreciated environmental crises that we face as a species living on this planet. The fundamental condition for sustaining a civilization, an agricultural civilization like ours and most prior ones, is sustaining the soil itself and its fertility. Could agricultural soil erosion and degradation limit the lifespan of civilizations? The problem of soil degradation tracks pretty much wherever people are. That there's a very strong connection around most parts of the world, and that it's a problem of great global concern. Why? Well, because over the past 40 years or so, essentially over my lifetime, soil erosion has caused farmers to abandon something like 430 million hectares of arable land, an area equivalent to about 1/3 of all present cropland. An area equivalent to the size of about India and China combined when viewed globally. And if you look at the problem of feeding the world out 50 years from now, we're going to need to essentially increase agricultural production by about at least 1/3 in order to feed the population that we expect to see coming, and that's if we maintain productivity at about the same rate. The key point is that we'll have to deal with the problem of soil erosion and degradation in the next century, and we can either deal with it proactively, and as I'll try and argue, restore soils globally, because it can be done, or we'll deal with it indirectly by essentially dealing with the degradation and loss of agricultural productivity and with all the negative consequences that may entail for society. The pace that we're losing soil globally is not, in fact, sustainable. So if you look at a soil as a system that's produced from the weathering of rocks to create soil and the erosion of the soils on the slopes that eliminates it, you can think of it in terms of an analogy to your bank account. Think about what happens to your bank account when you spend money faster than you make it. Eventually, you run out of your savings. Well, the extensive soil erosion across the Southeast did not occur because people are ignorant of soil conservation practices. Why would an agricultural society engage in widespread practices with known solutions, but not adopt them in a way that would undercut essentially what should be perceived as the viability of the country in the long run? Men may, because of ignorance or habit, ruin their soils. But more often, economic or social conditions entirely outside their control lead or force them to a treatment of their lands that can end only in ruin. In other words, farmers can become trapped in social, cultural, and economic systems that encourage or require them, in order to stay in business as a farmer, to essentially treat their land in ways that does not preserve the soil over the long run. And in that sense, the misalignment of individual incentives and large-scale societal incentives becomes a theme that I think plays through this problem of agricultural soil erosion and degradation. And that's actually the hardest problem to solve. If you're responding to very short-term stimuli, the need to actually pay off the machinery you have for the farm, pay off the agrochemicals you bought this year, pay off the bank to actually pay off the farm. You can actually be trapped in the model of maximizing short-term production at the expense of the ability to produce over the long run. The problem is not that we farm. The problem is how we farm. The problem is that the kinds of agricultural methods that could conserve the soil over the long run are called alternative agriculture. The pace of soil erosion has been jacked up by at least an order of magnitude by human activity. Walter Loudermilk 50 years ago wrote that here, in a nutshell, so to speak, we have the underlying hazard of civilization. By clearing and cultivating sloping lands, we expose soils to accelerated erosion by water, by wind. And in doing this, we enter upon a regime of self-destructive agriculture. We still have a ways to go before the projected maximum of human population about mid-century. The challenge of how you would feed a growing population is, of course, one that we've been wrestling with for about 50 years now, but we've been wrestling with it with essentially a strategy based on intensification of fertilizer use. Can we maintain this strategy in the long run as oil supplies dwindle and prices for oil and therefore fertilizers rise dramatically later this century? I don't know anybody who's arguing that fertilizers will become cheaper as a result of the price of oil going through the roof. This brings up the question then, how will we feed a post-oil world without cheap fertilizer-intensive agriculture? It's what we rely on today to do it, at the great part at the expense of native soil fertility. For our fundamental dependence on soil, it's amazing how little we understand about it. If you base agriculture essentially on the view of soil as simply to add the right chemicals and you get the right mix, in the end, I think you basically miss the fundamental, more modern realization that it's actually the life in the soil and the organic cycling and ecological activity that is the real root of soil fertility. Soil ecology is the sort of the intellectual foundation for the future of agriculture. It's what we need, how we need to think about soils as ecological systems. If we're to sustain life at the top, which fortunately is us, we must reinvest in life at the bottom, life in and of the soil itself, as the key to providing the foundation for our own species to eat comfortably into the future.